The transport truck kicked up a wall of dust as it rolled through the gates of Forward Operating Base Hollis, and the soldiers gathered near the motor pool didn't bother hiding their stares. A single passenger climbed down from the back, a young woman, maybe 23, with a duffel bag slung over one shoulder and a posture that seemed to apologize for taking up space. "That's the transfer?" Sergeant Briggs muttered, arms crossed as he watched her sign in at the gate checkpoint. "They sent us a kid." Private First Class Maya Castillo didn't look like much. She was barely 5'4", with dark hair pulled back in a tight bun and eyes that scanned the base perimeter once, quickly, before settling on the ground in front of her. Her file said she'd been pulled from a logistics unit 2 provinces over, reassigned to Hollis with no real explanation attached. Nobody requested her. Nobody knew why she was here. "Probably some admin screw-up," said Corporal Denny, spitting into the dirt. "Either way, she's not staying near the op room." By the time Maya reached the barracks, the whispers had already started. Soldiers didn't whisper quietly out here. They did it loud enough to be heard, because cruelty was easier when it pretended to be camaraderie. She heard the word transfer spoken like an insult, heard someone ask if she even knew how to load a rifle, heard laughter that wasn't really about anything except the fact that she was new and small and female, and therefore, in their minds, already a problem. She said nothing. She found her bunk, set her bag down, and began unpacking with movements that were too precise, too economical, for someone supposedly fresh out of a supply depot. Nobody noticed that. Not yet. The mission briefing happened the next morning in the cramped operations tent, maps spread across a folding table under a single buzzing light. Captain Reyes ran through the plan for a 6-man reconnaissance push into the hill country northeast of the base, a route through a series of old smuggling trails that hadn't been actively patrolled in over a year. Intelligence was thin. The terrain was worse. Maya stood near the back of the tent, included on the roster more out of bureaucratic obligation than intent. When Reyes pointed to a narrow pass on the map and called it the fastest route through, she spoke up before she could stop herself. "That pass floods during the spring thaw," she said. "The southern fork runs higher. It's slower, but it's dry." The tent went quiet for a second. Not the kind of quiet that meant people were listening, but the kind that meant people were deciding whether to be offended. "And you know that because?" Briggs asked, one eyebrow raised, already smirking at the rest of the team like he was setting up a punchline. "It's marked on older topo charts," Maya said. "Pre-2019 surveys." "Right," Briggs said, "because the cook's been studying topo charts in her spare time." A few soldiers laughed. Reyes didn't laugh, but he didn't take her seriously either. He glanced at the map, glanced at her, and made a decision that had less to do with terrain and everything to do with comfort. "We're sticking with the original route," he said. "Castillo, you'll hold down the base while we're out. Comm support, supply check, whatever Sergeant Okafor needs." It wasn't framed as a punishment. It didn't need to be. Everyone in that tent understood exactly what it meant. She wasn't trusted enough to go, and worse, nobody thought she'd mind being left behind. Maya opened her mouth once, like she wanted to push back further, then closed it. She'd learned somewhere that pushing too hard too early only made people dig in harder. She watched the team finish their briefing, watched Denny clap Briggs on the shoulder with a grin like the matter was already settled and forgotten, and filed out of the tent without another word. That afternoon, while the team did final equipment checks near the vehicles, Maya walked the perimeter of the motor pool alone, eyes tracing the tree line beyond the fence with an attention that didn't match her supposed job description. A young private named Tully, barely out of basic himself, fell into step beside her, more curious than hostile. "You really read old topo maps for fun?" he asked. "I read a lot of things," Maya said. "Briggs says you got transferred because you screwed something up at your last post." Maya's jaw tightened, just slightly. "Briggs says a lot of things." Tully laughed, not unkindly, and jogged off toward the trucks before she could say more. Maya stood there a moment longer, watching the team load gear into the vehicles that would carry them toward the southern hills. toward the route she'd warned them away from, toward terrain that, for reasons she hadn't explained and no one had asked her to explain, she seemed to know far better than any cook or clerk had any reason to. As the engine started and the dust began to rise again, she allowed herself one quiet, almost imperceptible breath. The kind of breath someone takes when they already know, with a sick certainty, exactly how this is going to go. By the time the team rolled out through the east gate, the story of Maya Castillo had already taken on a life of its own inside Hollis. In the mess hall, in the motor pool, even in the comms shack where she'd been assigned to assist Sergeant Okafor, soldiers traded theories like currency. Heard she got busted down a rank somewhere east, one private said, loud enough for Maya to hear from 2 tables away. Probably mouthed off to the wrong officer. I heard she failed out of something, another added. That's why she ended up on cooking duty. None of it was true. None of it was based on anything except the fact that nobody had a real answer, and silence made people uncomfortable enough to invent one. Maya let it wash over her. She'd learned a long time ago that correcting rumors only fed them. Instead, she focused on the comms shack, on the radio frequencies and the supply logs Okafor handed her without much explanation, the way you'd hand busy work to someone you didn't expect to keep around long. But Okafor wasn't stupid. He'd been in long enough to notice things other people didn't bother looking for. He noticed, for instance, that when a garbled transmission came through from a nearby outpost, Maya identified the dialect inflection in the static before he did. Not just recognized it as foreign, but named the specific regional accent, the kind of detail that took years of field exposure to pick up. You speak Pashto? He asked, careful, like he was testing the edge of something. Enough, Maya said, eyes still on the radio dial. Enough to do what, exactly? She didn't answer that one. She adjusted the frequency, found the signal again, and let the silence sit until Okafor decided not to push. It happened again an hour later, smaller this time, easy to miss if you weren't paying attention. Maya was helping reorganize a supply crate when she glanced at a map pinned to the comms shack wall, the same hill route the team had taken that morning, and her hand paused over a ridge line marked only by a thin elevation contour. There's a dry creek bed there, she murmured, mostly to herself. Runs north past the second ridge. Good cover if you need it. Tully, who'd wandered in to grab supplies, blinked at her. How would you know that? That's not even labeled. Maya realized, a beat too late, that she'd spoken out loud. Lucky guess, she said, and went back to the crate. It wasn't a lucky guess, and Tully's expression said he half knew it. But like everyone else at Hollis, he didn't have the vocabulary yet to turn a strange feeling into a real question. He just filed it away. One more odd detail about the new transfer nobody understood, and went back to his work. What none of them noticed, because none of them were looking closely enough, was the way Maya's eyes kept drifting back to that map. Not with curiosity, with recognition. The kind of recognition that comes from having walked a place before, not read about it. Out in the hills, the team pushed deeper into terrain that looked, on paper, manageable. Reyes kept them on the northern pass, the faster route, the one Maya had warned against. And for the first 2 hours, it seemed like the right call. The trail was dry, the visibility good, the pace steady. Then the ground began to change. What looked like solid earth on the map gave way, in places, to soft runoff silt left over from snowmelt higher in the hills. Exactly the kind of seasonal flooding pattern Maya had mentioned back in the briefing tent. The lead vehicle slowed, then stopped, tires sinking slightly into ground that shouldn't have been wet this late in the season. This wasn't on the survey, Briggs said, frustration creeping into his voice as he climbed out to check the terrain. It's spring thaw, Reyes said, almost to himself, remembering, too late, the comment he dismissed in the tent. He didn't say it out loud, but the thought sat there anyway, uncomfortable and unwelcome. The cook had been right. They pushed forward anyway, picking a slower path around the worst of the silt, losing nearly 40 minutes they hadn't planned to lose. Nobody radioed back to base to mention it. Nobody wanted to admit, this early, that the warning they'd laughed off in the tent might have been worth listening to. Back at Hollis, Maya checked the comms log out of habit, noted the team's last position update, and frowned slightly at the timestamp gap that followed. It was a small thing, the kind of delay that happened all the time in rough terrain, but something about it made her stay a little closer to the radio than her actual duties required. She didn't say anything. Not yet. She just listened and waited, the way someone does when they already suspect that quiet is about to end. The last clean transmission came in at 14:47 hours. Reyes confirming a checkpoint, voice flat and routine. Nothing in it to suggest anything was wrong. After that, nothing. Okafor tried the scheduled check-in at 1500. No response. He tried again at 1510, adjusting frequency, assuming static or bad terrain. By 1520, the silence had gone from routine to wrong, and the comms shack started to feel smaller than it actually was. Probably just dead ground, Okafor said, more to convince himself than anyone else. Those hills eat signal. Maya didn't answer right away. She'd pulled the team's planned route up on the wall map, tracing the northern pass with one finger, stopping at a cluster of ridgelines that formed a natural radio shadow. The same dead zone she'd referenced without realizing it the day before. "They're not going to come back up on this frequency," she said quietly. "Not from where they probably are." Okafor looked at her. "And where's that?" "East Fork, second ridge. There's a basin behind it. If they hit trouble anywhere along that stretch, the terrain blocks line of sight to every relay we've got." "You're real specific for someone reading an unlabeled map," Okafor said, but there wasn't mockery in it this time. There was something closer to unease. By 1535, Base Command had escalated the silence to an active concern. Lieutenant Colonel Hargrove, Hollis's commanding officer, arrived in the operations tent with the particular calm of a man who'd handled worse and hated that he had to handle this. He listened to Okafor's summary: last known position, missed check-ins, no distress signal, and nodded once, already running through contingency options in his head. "Get a QRF spun up," Hargrove said, "and somebody find me a better picture of that terrain than what we've got." That was when Maya stepped forward. "Sir, I might have something." Hargrove turned, taking her in with the brief, dismissive assessment of a man with too many problems and not enough time. "You're the new transfer." "Castillo, sir. I've got information on that terrain that isn't in the current briefing packet." "How would you have that?" It was the question everyone had been circling for 2 days without ever asking directly, and now that it was finally on the table, Maya hesitated only long enough to choose her words carefully. "I can explain that later, sir. Right now, the team is most likely pinned in a basin past the second ridge. Bad signal, limited cover, no clean path to extract without going through ground that's probably still soft from runoff. I can mark it on the map." Hargrove glanced at Okafor, a silent question. Okafor gave a small shrug that meant something like, "I don't know either, but she hasn't been wrong yet." "Mark it," Hargrove said. Maya moved to the map with the kind of efficiency that didn't belong to someone who'd spent the last 48 hours peeling potatoes and organizing crates. She traced the route the team had likely taken, marked the basin, identified 2 possible extraction points based on elevation and tree cover, and flagged the radio dead zone with a confidence that made the tent go quiet again. Not mocking quiet this time, but the quiet of people recalculating who they were dealing with. "This is detailed," Hargrove said slowly. "It needs to be, sir, or it's not useful." He studied her for a long moment, the kind of look that wasn't quite suspicion and wasn't quite respect yet, but was clearly no longer dismissal. "Stand by," he said, and turned back to the QRF planning. Already moving on to logistics, he understood better than the strange, sharp competence standing in front of him. Maya stood by. But she didn't stop watching the map, and she didn't stop running numbers in her head. Distances, terrain grades, time windows. The kind of calculations that came from training nobody at Hollis had given her. At 1612, a fragment of a transmission broke through the static, garbled, weak, but real. Briggs's voice, tight with pain and barely controlled panic. Pinned down, contact from the ridge, Reyes is hit, repeat, Reyes is hit. The signal cut before he could give coordinates. Okafor swore under his breath and tried to raise them again, getting nothing but dead air in return. Hargrove's jaw tightened. QRF is 20 minutes out, best case. 20 minutes might be too long, Maya said. We're aware of the timeline, Private. That's not what I mean, sir. Maya stepped closer to the map again, voice steady in a way that cut through the rising tension in the tent. If Reyes is hit and they're pinned from the ridge, they're not in the basin anymore. They've moved for cover, which means the QRF's current route is going to walk right past them without ever knowing they're there. I can get on that radio and guide them to a position where extraction actually works, but I need you to let me try. Hargrove looked at her. Really looked. The way Hargrove looked when he was deciding whether to take a risk on something he didn't fully understand. Sir, Okafor added quietly, she's been right about every piece of this so far. Hargrove exhaled once, slow. You get 60 seconds to convince me this isn't a mistake. Maya didn't waste a single one of them. 60 seconds, Hargrove said again, arms crossed. Maya didn't reach for the radio yet. She reached for the map instead, finger landing on a narrow gap between two elevation lines that most people would have glanced past without a second thought. If they pulled back from the ridge under fire, they went downhill, not up. Nobody runs uphill into open ground under contact. That puts them in this fold here, between the second ridge and the basin. It's narrow, but it's got rock cover on 3 sides. It's defensible. She traced a line from the fold toward a wider stretch of terrain half a kilometer south. If I can get them moving along this draw, it links up with a flatter approach the QRF can actually reach without walking into the same kill zone Briggs's team hit. That's a lot of confidence for guesswork, Hargrove said. It's not guesswork, sir. It's terrain reading. I'm telling you what the ground allows, not what I hope happened. Hargrove held her gaze a moment longer, then looked at Okafor, who gave the smallest possible nod. Not full confidence, but enough. 60 seconds is up, Hargrove said. Get on the radio. If this goes wrong, it's my career, not yours, so you'd better be as good as you sound. Understood, sir. Maya took the handset like she'd done it 1,000 times before. No hesitation, no fumbling with the unfamiliar weight of command. Any station, this is Hollis Actual Relay. Radio check, over. Static. Then, faint but unmistakable. Hollis, this is... Barely got you. Who is this? This is Castillo. I need you to listen carefully and trust me. Do not move toward the basin. Repeat. Do not move toward the basin. Find the rock fold downhill from your position, 3 sides of cover. Can you confirm terrain? A pause, then Briggs's voice, ragged. Yeah, we're already near it. How do you... Stay there. QRF is moving to intercept from the south along a draw that'll keep you out of sight from the ridge. I need an azimuth from your position to the tallest visible peak so I can confirm you're where I think you are. There was a beat of stunned silence on the other end. Not because the request was unreasonable, but because it was exactly the kind of request a trained operator would make. Not a cook. 310, Briggs said finally. Maya did the math in her head, fast, cross-referencing against the map without needing to look down. Confirmed. You're in the fold. Keep Reyes stable, keep low, and do not engage unless they're inside 50 meters. QRFETA 15 minutes. She handed coordinates to Okafor, who relayed them to the QRF convoy already moving through the gate. Hargrove watched the whole exchange without speaking, arms still crossed, but something in his posture had shifted. Less skepticism now, more calculation, like a man rereading a sentence he'd misunderstood the first time. Where did you learn to read terrain like that? He asked quietly, almost to himself. Maya didn't answer. She was already back on the radio, voice level, walking Briggs through how to angle their position for the cleanest possible line of sight, without exposing themselves further. The next 10 minutes felt longer than the 2 days Maya had spent at Hollis combined. Twice the line went quiet long enough for Okafor's hand to hover over the dial, and twice Maya's voice cut through before he touched it, calm in a way that didn't match the moment at all. "They're still there. If contact was sustained, you'd have heard it pick back up by now." She was right both times. When the QRF finally radioed confirmation, visual on the pinned team, no contact in the final approach, Rhea's alive but in bad shape. The operations tent didn't erupt into celebration so much as collective, exhausted relief. Hargrove allowed himself one slow breath before his expression hardened back into focus. "Get medevac inbound," he said. Then, turning to Maya, "You and I are going to have a conversation, Private. Once this is over." "Understood, sir." But Hargrove didn't walk away immediately. He stood there a moment longer, studying her the way he might study an unfamiliar weapon. Useful, clearly, but not yet understood. Behind him, Okafor was already pulling up Maya's personnel file on the terminal, scrolling past the bland transfer notice that had told them nothing 2 days ago. This time, he scrolled slower. And near the bottom of the file, beneath layers of redacted text and a unit designation nobody at Hollis recognized, was a single line that made him stop cold. He didn't say anything yet. He just looked up at Maya, still on the radio, still calmly guiding a wounded team home, and understood, with sudden clarity, that whatever she was not what any of them had assumed on her first day. The medevac brought the team back just before sunset. Rhea's stable but pale, stretcher-bound, the rest of the squad bruised and exhausted but alive. Briggs was the first one off the helicopter, and the first thing he did, before checking his own gear, was scan the base until he found Maya standing near the comms tent. He walked straight to her, said nothing for a second, then simply said, "You knew exactly where we'd be." "I knew where the terrain would put you," Maya said. "That's not the same as luck." Briggs studied her for a long moment, something shifting behind his eyes. The particular discomfort of a man realizing he'd spent 2 days mocking the person who just saved his life. He didn't apologize yet, but he didn't walk away with a smirk either, and for Briggs, that was close enough to a start. Hargrove called her into his office an hour later. Okafor was already there, along with a manila folder sitting closed on the desk. The kind of folder that had clearly traveled through more hands and more clearance levels than anything that usually crossed Hollis. "I made some calls," Hargrove said, not bothering with small talk. "Took longer than it should have, because most of what's in here is still redacted, but I got enough." He opened the folder. Maya didn't look at it. She didn't need to. 3 years with a joint intelligence unit operating in this exact province, Hargrove said. Terrain mapping, regional dialect work, embedded reconnaissance. Then a gap in the record, then a transfer request that came from somewhere well above my pay grade, placing you here as a logistics specialist. He looked up. "You want to explain that?" "There's not much to explain that isn't already in the file, sir," Maya said. "I worked this region. The placement was deliberate. They wanted someone with ground knowledge here in case something like today happened, without flagging it as anything other than a routine transfer." "And nobody thought to tell me," Hargrove said, more frustrated with the chain of command than with her. "Above my pay grade too, sir." Hargrove almost laughed at that. Almost. He closed the folder, leaned back in his chair, and looked at her with an expression that had fully shed whatever skepticism remained from 2 days earlier. "You let an entire base treat you like a joke for 48 hours. Wasn't really a choice, sir. The cover only works if it's believed." "Well," Hargrove said, "it's not going to keep working now. Not after this." Word moved through Hollis fast the next morning. Not as rumor this time, but as fact. Confirmed top-down by Hargrove himself in a brief pointed announcement that left no room for argument. Private First Class Maya Castillo had operational experience in the region that had directly saved a 6-man team the day before. Anyone who had a problem with that could bring it to him personally. Nobody did. Briggs found her near the mess hall that afternoon, hesitating in a way that didn't suit him. "For what it's worth," he said, "I was wrong. About all of it." "You were scared and looking for somewhere to put it," Maya said, not unkindly. "Doesn't make it right. But I get it." Denny didn't say much at all, but he started carrying her tray once, unprompted, in a clumsy gesture that everyone understood for what it was. Tully, the only one who'd never been outright cruel, just grinned and said, "Knew you weren't just reading maps for fun," and Maya allowed herself something close to a real smile for the first time since she'd arrived. Reyes, recovering in the base infirmary, asked to see her before she was reassigned again, because that was always coming, eventually, the way it had every time before. "You saved my team," he said. "I dismissed you in that tent without a second thought." "You didn't know," Maya said. "That's the job. People only see what you let them see. Doesn't make it feel any better." "It's not supposed to," she said. "But you listened when it mattered. That's the part that counts." She left Hollis 2 weeks later, orders cut quietly, the way they always were. No fanfare, no announcement. Just a transport truck idling at the gate, same as the one that had brought her in. But this time, soldiers came out to see her off. Briggs shook her hand. Okafor gave her a short nod that said more than words could. Hargrove, watching from the operations tent, simply said, "Wherever they send you next, they're lucky to have you," and meant it. Maya climbed into the truck without ceremony, the same quiet competence she'd arrived with, now carrying a different weight entirely. Not the weight of being underestimated, but the weight of having been, for one tense afternoon, exactly what an entire team needed and never knew they had. As the truck pulled away from Hollis, kicking up the same dust it had 2 weeks before, she allowed herself to look back once at the base that had almost never known who she really was, and felt, for the first time in a long time, that being unseen had finally been worth it. And that's how Maya Castillo went from the soldier nobody wanted to the one nobody will ever forget. If this story hit you right in the feels, you know what to do. Drop a like, subscribe if you're new here, and let me know in the comments which moment got you the most. Thank you so much for watching all the way to the end. I'll see you in the next story.